Have you incorporated AI? But it's just queries, right? Of what's the data in the sales machine.
AI can do cool. It can do cool things. I think that we're in the second inning of AI. It's going to get wild.
It's going to get wild.
We've got some applications. The technology's not quite there yet to really be what people need day to day. You can do some stuff with it. It does great demos, but what you'll see now is you got all these companies, I think.
And now the man you've been waiting for, John, the sales machine, Rankins.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest is a powerhouse influencer in sales coaching. He has built high-performing sales teams in industries that range from manufacturing to technology. He knows what works in practice, not just in theory. He's a high-value advisor to multiple accelerators and is a best-selling author of multiple books on sales, including the Sales Enablement Playbook. He's a dynamic keynote speaker who has spoken all over the world, the co-founder of Coach CRM and Closed Loop. Please welcome Cory Bray.
Hey, John, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I've been looking forward to this for a while. Tell me, how did you get into sales and fall in love with it?
I started a business in 2012, and one of my mentors told me, he said, if you don't learn how to sell, you're not going to be successful. Up until that point, I'd worked in finance and operations, and I didn't know anything about sales because when I went to college, they didn't teach us anything about it. I'd worked with sales teams. I'd had experience, working with them from the finance and operations side, mostly around how do we get people up to speed around onboarding and stuff like that. But in terms of selling, it's just not something I did. And so he said, you need to learn how to sell. So I said, all right, cool, let's do it. Next thing you know, here we are. It's what I do now.
Right on. And tell me about the first thing you ever sold.
First thing I ever sold was the first thing I really sold. So I had started a consulting business that ended up pivoting into business intelligence. And so we would sell business intelligence software and the implementation services that went along with that. And what I found was that it was when people were mostly working off of spreadsheets, early 2010s, 2012, 2013. And so it was a lot of greenfield out there. There were people using spreadsheets for everything, or they were trying to get stuff out of SAP or Oracle, big ugly systems like that. And so that was where we started.
I was managing 200 sales offices, and I was keeping track of everything in Excel, and I was going nuts because I couldn't keep up. Each sales office had between 20 and 30 salespeople. That's why and we can get into the software gig later. That's why I built my own sales performance management system. I really do work to strive to stay away from the CRM word, because to me, that's the road to the bottom.
It can be. We put it in our name for some specific reasons. We can talk about that later.
Early on, you said you jumped into sales 2012. What did you have any obstacles, and what was your biggest challenge learning sales?
I think it was about how do you structure the meetings that you have to get what you want to get out of them. Because when I said I hadn't done sales before, when I was working in I was working for this private equity firm that owned a bunch of different companies, and one of them had a big sales team. And so I did a big analysis project around what was wrong with the sales team, what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong, and all that type of stuff. And that was more transactional. It was very transactional. It was like more account management than it was sales, because they'd already acquired the customer. They were just processing additional orders, incremental orders, trying to get market share from the competitors in the commodity market. But when it comes to things like selling business intelligence software, you're not processing orders constantly with the same customers. You're making a sale and it's going to stick for 3 to 5 years. And so it was really about, how do we do all the things that we need to do? How do we know what we need to do across the sales process and within each sales meeting, and learn from what's working and what's not working? Because with a lot of these folks, you only got one shot. And I think that was one of the big things that I clung on to early on, and quickly realized that a lot of times companies are reinventing the wheel, or they have yet to reinvent the wheel, and people are just doing randomly what they think they can do. And that's what really led me to to thinking about this in more depth and structuring our business around it.
Yeah, a lot of people wing it. I always tell them, if you want to win it, there's no winging it. That's just it's gonna be inconsistent and create inconsistent results all the time.
Yeah, and even if a person can wing it and do well, how do you get a team to wing it and have a manager be successful? And how do you get a company to wing it and have all the managers be successful with all of their teams? It's not possible.
Exactly. And so I'm total alignment. And so for me, follow the process. If you follow a sequential process, right, to extract what it is that they actually need, how is it going to grow their business, and how is it going to allow them to scale their business? I always call it raising the water line. A lot of people say, well, it's the 80-20 principle, or like the Pareto principle. Yeah, that's correct if you're always winging it. But if you have a system, right, that others can follow, that's sequential,
Yeah.
and you can duplicate results. So tell me about the biggest aha moment you had when you started getting into that process and actually duplicating yourself with the system.
Well, I think the biggest aha moment came a little bit later when I had a guy who had studied engineering at MIT working with me, and he said, "Oh, so everything that you're explaining, this is just my sales algorithm." And he's got algorithms for everything that he does in his world of computer science. And I'd studied computer science a decent amount and passed the AP test in high school, but all the engineers think I'm a dork for saying that. All the non-engineers think I'm a dork for saying that. So I end up in this weird place, purgatory of people that know a little bit about computers. And he just explained to me, he said, okay, so what you're telling me is that I've got this market and there's personas inside of the market, and I've got some competition that's putting some pressure on me. And then I've got this company, we have a process, and there's 6 or 8 steps between when we start and when we finish. And I do these things, I do discovery, and at some point I might show a presentation or a demo, and then I can disqualify at any point. And then we're going to get hit with objections and need to deliver customer stories. And then the product evolves and the market evolves and all this stuff. He's like, you just described a circuit board to me. And I said, yeah, that's it. And all these people run around and talk about how it's art or things like that. I've never heard anybody that has a engineering degree describe sales as art. I've only heard people that fail to have a systems thinking discipline describe it as art. Yeah, sure. There's techniques that you can do, just like in golf, for example. You can hit a draw, you can hit a fade, but that's still not art, it's physics. And once you realize that everything is just an algorithm, and yeah, sure, sometimes things don't work out as you wish they did, but that's the case in drug discovery, for example, which is about as sciencey as you can get. Then it becomes much more clear that as you want to build a person through a career and then get lots of people and build a team and lots of teams and build a company, there's a path that you can follow that minimizes risk, maximizes reward, and creates the opportunity of repeatability, which is pretty much the holy grail of business, because even the small private company level, you've got a board of directors that's looking at actuals versus expected revenue, profitability, whatever it is. And that's what you're shooting for. So yeah, sales is an algorithm.
Yeah, I agree. If you want your success to be automatic, make it scientific. I love that, right? Now are working with helping other companies scale their sales teams. So what is your methodology for getting in there and getting things done to actually systemize or build a system for companies?
Well, so I've got 2 businesses. I've got Closed Loop, which is a consulting firm, and Coach CRM, which is a software company. On the consulting firm side, methodology is real simple. It's do an assessment on the front end, figure out what the problems are, prioritize and figure out what the appetite for both time investment and financial investment is to fix those, build something, which for a firm like us, we worked with, 700 customers or so over the last 7 or 8 years. A lot of things on the shelf that we can drop in 80% done and customize for the client, and then hand it off to the client to operate. And so assess, build and deploy, and then hand it off to them to operate. And the mistake that so many companies make is that they hire people in sales enablement, sales operations, training, whatever it is internally, who have built something 0, 1, 2, 3 times before. and they try to create something from scratch based on what their recollection of their prior experience was. And then it just becomes a copy of a copy. And so what our methodology is really let's figure out what the real root cause of the problems are, and then put something in place that's tried and true, and not only works at the base case, the expected case, but it also covers different scenarios and edge cases that could pop up, and then hand that off to the team to operate, because that's what they're great at, is continuous internal operations of whatever was rolled out, be it skills development, manager development, playbooks, academies, whatever it is. That's what we found to be successful.
And do you get involved in the actual qualifying of candidates and recruiting beyond the training?
We don't have a recruiting business. I wrote a book called Hiring, Onboarding, and Ramping Salespeople, and we have a sales hiring course. So that's something that we work with companies on structurally. But in terms of actually doing the recruiting, there's partners we'll recommend, but that's not something we do.
When you go into a company, obviously, they bring you guys in as advisors. Do you ever have to deal with sales managers and a lot of mavericks and resistance?
Sometimes. I think that companies typically don't hire external help until they realize they have a pretty big problem that they need to fix. And if executive leadership has defined something as a pretty big problem, there's always a way that you can create enough what's in it for me up and down the chain. I think you definitely have mavericks. There's two types of mavericks. There's mavericks that are succeeding and mavericks that are failing. And if somebody's being really successful doing whatever they're doing, just let them be. There's no reason to go change something that's really working. And if they're crushing it, let them do their thing. And then look at the rest of the org and figure out how can they become more successful. Because the best salespeople out there that have been doing it for a long time, yeah, they've got what works. Why mess with them?
Yeah, I always say, let's extract what they're doing, and you guys can role play it and get good at it, right? The only way to get better is to practice.
If it's simple enough, I 100% agree with you. I think the challenge is that a lot of times they're playing at a professional level when you've got other folks that are at an amateur level. And do what I do is the downfall of so many folks that were promoted from seller to sales manager, because do what I do only works if you've got the aptitude and skill set of that person who's already been doing it. And a lot of times that just doesn't exist.
So for a lot of sales managers or business owners out there listening right now who are struggling to motivate their top performers, what's some actionable advice you would give them?
Making money easier. There's a few ways that you can do that. Easiest way to do it is make the product better. And it's funny because it's almost an unspoken rule that salespeople shouldn't complain about the product. But guess what? A lot of products aren't good. So the thing that I talk to CEOs and business owners about is, are you defining all of these, let's call them playbook elements, target market, personas, competition, pain that you're solving, anticipated resistance? Are you defining all of these things before or after you build the product? And if it's not a physical product, are you doing it before you create the partnership or whatever you're doing on the product development side? And if you're not doing that beforehand and you just build stuff and then hand it over to marketing and sales and say, hey, make this work, that's just dumb. And that will not work. So the first thing that you can do is apply some discipline around how you're going to sell this thing before, if it's software, before you write a line of code, or if it's some other type of product, before you start designing and speccing it. That's the number one thing you can think about as an owner or CEO.
I interviewed Steve Wozniak, and I said, Steve, I've always been enamored by Apple, and Steve Jobs, he's an icon, but I also know Steve Wozniak, and we send mail to each other, right? And he's like, it's a lot different, right? With the Steve in the latter days and versus the Steve in the early days. And I said, so, you've been a part of a company that became a $1 trillion company. Like, that's reality. What's the formula? And he said exactly that. He said, John, number one, you've got to have a great product. That's first and foremost, Cory.
It's all that matters. Everything else is just, at some point, it becomes rearranging the deck furniture in the Titanic.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's gonna sink. But then he did go on and I extrapolated out of him that once you have the great product, you've got to have great sales and marketing. And marketing's got to align with the sales team. Cory, you've been doing this a while, and now you even have an investment firm, right? So let's talk about that as far as the marketing is concerned. When you go into a lot of companies, sometimes it's not a product problem. Sometimes it's not a sales problem. Oftentimes, there's not any leads. There's no marketing. The pipelines are empty.
Well, and that gets to unspoken rule number 2. So the first one was salespeople can't complain about the product. Second of all, salespeople can't complain about the leads because they should be doing their own prospecting. And you're completely right. If salespeople don't have leads, what are they going to sell? And are you just hiring very highly paid people to go become just marketers, solo marketing agencies, as I heard someone say one time? Yeah, spot on. And I think marketing's tough because there's so many different types of marketing. You've got brand marketing, digital marketing, performance marketing, content marketing, demand generation. You got all these different things that you can do. And I think that aligning the type of marketing that you need to what the rest of the organization needs at that time is critical, because sometimes you get these folks that worked at the bigger companies coming down market and they want to do brand. Well, that's not going to create leads. What might create leads is doing some hardcore demand generation activities where you're doing very pointed campaigns that are going to bring in folks that might not have heard of you, but you might agitate them a little bit with some solid webinars, content events, whatever you're doing. And so having the right type of marketing that matches what the goals for the organization are, oftentimes, how do we just get more meetings for the salespeople? That's key, and not just doing stuff, because marketing can do stuff all day.
Oh, they're good at doing stuff.
Yeah. And then they can hire agencies to do stuff too and like manage their stuff by doing stuff.
They're just good at doing stuff. And if it's not working, I know the reason why every single time. Because they don't have enough budget. Just give them more money. Cory, give us some more money. So speaking to that, and because I know you know, and you know I know, Coach CRM. So let's talk about, how do you generate leads for Coach CRM?
Well, we've got a freemium product. That's one of the things that we do. We've done a bunch of events in the past, worked through referrals, things like that. Just we're early stage with the product. It's blocking and tackling. We spun it out of closed loop just several months ago.
Right on. Well, congratulations. I'm $2 million in on my project, because when you build enterprise level CRM, or for me, sales performance management. So we're not a CRM. We have one, kind of like you have arms and legs, but I don't think you are your arms and legs. That's just an address book. The other day, though, I want to share with you, Cory, because I just want to make you laugh. A lot of people in my organization were saying, well, it's tough to generate leads. It's, we can't get past the gatekeepers. And I said, well, you want me to show you how? And they're like, sure. So I'm like, okay, we also sell this loyalty app called Fun Crowds, right? Creates loyalty and rewards and cash back systems for small businesses. So I'm like, come on, I'll show you how to generate leads in marketing. And I'm like, get in the car. So we went to the mall. We pitched 100 people. I got like 90 decision makers, straight to the decision makers. So I'm like, but I'm a door-to-door guy. All right. So I can always default to knock, knock. How you doing? And anyway, problem solved. What's your methodology for actually generating leads or prospecting and with the salesperson to actually fill up a pipeline? Because I'm in alignment with you, Cory. Salespeople need to prospect.
Well, I think the trick is, depending on what your market is, what your company is, try a bunch of stuff and see what works, and whatever works, double down on that. So, for example, I've worked with a bunch of companies that sell maintenance software. Well, what do maintenance guys do? They're at their desk, or they're if you're running a maintenance organization, you've got a phone around you somewhere. And when that phone rings, it might be somebody needing something. So they pick it up. So if you're selling into maintenance organizations, just pick up the phone and call them. Now, if you're selling into development operations, they don't have a company phone. And these days they're probably sitting in their house in their basement somewhere, far away from anything. What do those guys love doing? They love tinkering and trying stuff out. So create some kind of product-led growth, free trial, whatever it is that they can get in and put a gate conversation wall, paywall up as soon as they get into it. So I think the tactics need to be derived from what is the job to be done of the end user, and what's that buyer persona like to do? Where do they hang out? What's their proclivity to do things like pick up the phone or tinker with a free trial? That's where I'd start.
We go to trade shows, we go to different places, and we always ask for referrals. So do you have a referral system that you implement at the end of your sales process? How do you normally generate referrals?
Yeah, I'll ask people for referrals. Sure. All the time.
But do you put that in your sales methodology for the salespeople as well?
Well, not explicit. So we have a framework for generating referrals. It's called the DOTS framework. And I won't get into it now, but it's a way to think about asking for referrals. It's in there. It's not the core focus, because a lot of times when we're rolling out the sales methodology, it's wild how terrible companies are at getting their folks to set agendas, find pain, do compelling demos and presentations, and set next steps. So a lot of times when we're working with a sales team, those are the 4 things that we're hammering on. And I think that when, especially in today's world where everybody's on TikTok and Instagram and iMessage every 4 minutes, what I found is when I try to roll out 12 or 15 things at once, I was like, this is way too much. I can't focus. I'm confused. I was like, all right, cool. Agendas, pain, next steps, compelling demos and presentations. Let's hammer on that. So yeah, referrals is definitely something that we work with teams on. It's typically a second or third order thing though.
Right on. And getting into the CRM world, or for like Coach CRM, what brought that about? Was it that you went in, you were advising lots of different companies, and you figured out that a lot of the CRMs out there are too complicated, people don't use them? Like, what drove you down that path?
Well, we're not a CRM in the traditional sense where we don't track deals. What drove me down that path was we've got a program where we train managers on a whole host of things, one of them being coaching. And I was working with this team. They had about 30 managers. And the chief revenue officer comes up to me after our sessions and he says, look, that was phenomenal. He says, the team got a ton out of it. This is going to be game changing for us. But I've got a question for you. 6 months from now, how do I know this is working? How do I know people are doing it? And I looked at him and I said, well, everybody got a workbook as part of this. And each person has a workbook. And for each individual manager, each person on their team has a tab. And each coaching conversation has a column. And he just looked at me and said, yeah, that's something I'll never look at. And I said, well, what do you want? He said, I just want to know if they're doing it. And I want to be able to spot check quality. I said, okay. So then I just went and talked to a bunch of other people. And I said, hey, what are you thinking about how you know it's working or how you dig into it? Same conversation. It's like, well, all that's being described here is an application layer on top of a database with some cool stuff. And then obviously, add whatever into it later on. So I just started talking to people about this, pre-sold 6 of them, I think, raised some money for my buddies. And there we go.
Awesome. So I love it because you solved a problem, right? And so, the sales machine software, potentially we could work with you in our framework. As an example, I have a patent pending on the system. So essentially it's 5 modules: sales CRM, marketing campaigns, achievements, retention, and training. You understand the software game. It's kind of like having Salesforce, MailChimp, Zendesk, Udemy, and the achievement is where the patent pending is on it, and it all spells out SMART: sales, marketing, achievements, retention, and training. But under our achievement module, that's where we essentially, it has goals, everybody has to start with a goal or in the corporate world, a KPI, right? And then you have contests, you have challenges, you have competitions. So it's gamified with leaderboards, right? And dashboards. So like what your guy told you he wanted, that chief revenue officer, he's got, I call it the CEO dashboard. So you can see it all in one page, exactly what's happening. And then obviously you can see your retention, and you have a training system within that. And there's coaching underneath that achievement, because the only way for people to get better is to identify their own blind spots or have somebody give them feedback. So I love what you're doing. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I've actually had people on the podcast that use AI to extrapolate all of the information and put it into dashboards. Tell me, what do you think about? Have you incorporated AI? I've incorporated AI in, but it's just queries, right? Of what's the data in the sales machine.
AI can do cool. It can do cool things. I think that we're in the second inning of AI. It's going to get wild.
Yeah, it's gonna get wild. So, have you guys incorporated it?
Yeah. We've got some applications. I think the technology's not quite there yet to really be what people need day to day. You can do some stuff with it. It does great demos, but what you'll see now is you got all these companies. I think the Y Combinator batch is like 70% AI companies or 80% AI companies. It's so many early startups that have a wrapper, they call wrapper around ChatGPT. So for example, you've got an underlying large language model and then you put a user interface on top of it. Well, there's no IP there. And that's where it's going to get really interesting, because I think that AI doesn't necessarily create the product. It creates a feature. And if it creates a feature, it certainly doesn't create a company. And that's what a lot of people are going to have to wrestle with. The legacy companies are going to have to figure out how to integrate it into their product as features. And then the startups are going to have to figure out, how do you take these features and extrapolate those into a company? Both of those are challenges for folks that's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love how you've evolved what you do. I had Mark Roberge on the podcast from HubSpot. He grew it to 10,000. He's a badass, right? There's just nothing to talk about. The company's worth $30 billion. So I had him on the podcast, and he said, he dealt with a lot of serendipity, like just going where, things were happening, solving problems, and then scaling them. And he's a systems expert and a systems fanatic, like what you and I are talking about, right? There's a sequence. Like, really being great at sales for me is only three things. And Zig Ziglar said it better than everyone on planet Earth. It's service, solving a problem, and making sure your customers are satisfied and you can keep going back to them. And I'm like, I love that. That's SSS. So I love, though, how Mark connected the dots, and I talked to you to hear you connected the dots, because you don't need a bunch of superstar salespeople as long as you have a great product. So more and more, what I'm hearing from you is your evolution came from just solving the next problem, right? You went from the consulting, developing the coaching, the coaching became the CRM, and now you've started an investment firm. Tell me about that and how that came about.
Well, I didn't start the investment firm. My friend started the investment firm, and we just helped the portfolio with sales. That's my role. The evolution was that there's a lot of seed funds out there that invest early stage with companies. And what they saw was an opportunity to be the highest value check into a company, where they can help with sales leadership support and engineering and CEO mentorship. And so they've created a portfolio of service providers that are included as part of their investment. And they don't charge for it. It's not like one of these accelerators that says, hey, I'm going to take, whatever percent of your company. It's just part of what creates a competitive advantage for them. And so that's through 212 Angels. If anybody's got a exciting early stage startup, flip me a note and I'll get you in front of the right people.
Well, I do have one of those.
There we go. Yeah, it's wild because the deal flow because of that service model is just insane. So it doesn't result in a high acceptance rate, but I think we've done, I don't know, 60 or 70 deals over the last couple of years.
When you look at individual deals, like you've heard of Alex Hormozy, right? I mean, he's pretty popular nowadays, right? And now he's doing acquisition.com. Anyway, I went to a private mastermind of his. And essentially, they were talking about EBITDA and valuations of companies. And then at the end of this, couple day gig, I talked to his top guy and he goes, "Oh, well, this doesn't really apply to you because you're a startup. So the valuation is determined by who sees the vision of scaling it all out." And Mark Roberts is like, "No, EBITDA is out the door." And that model is not even considered in the startup game. So how do you guys, because, I figured it out in my head, but I could essentially be wrong. I'm not in the private equity game, but to me, like more and more that I talk to different people, different valuation of your company. Some talk about ARR, some talk about growth, some talk about stickiness, some talk about your team. What do you guys essentially look at to value a potential investment?
Well, in the early stages, value is either determined by the founder or the lead investor. If it's super early and somebody's doing what they call a party round where there's lots of investors and there's no specific leader, the founder set the valuation. It's not necessarily a valuation because a lot of people raise money on SAFE, so it's simple agreement for future equity. It's basically a document that says when we raise a price round, when we value the company, you'll be able to invest at a discounted rate, usually a heavily discounted rate. And they do that because if you price a company, you got to pay the lawyers like 30 grand. And it's not what you want to do with your first dollars that come into your business. So you'll form that type of agreement. Or if there's a lead investor, then the lead investor can price and then anybody else can follow on. I think that the interesting thing to look at is in the early days, look at all the successful companies out there, HubSpot, Uber, Google, or even the companies that are worth nowhere near what those massive juggernauts are. Anyone who was discerning about valuation at the seed stage or even Series A, they just missed out on the deal. And so you were worried about it being worth 12 million instead of 10 million, and you missed out on getting a quarter point or a couple percent of what eventually became a $100 billion company, whatever it is. And that's the fascinating thing is, you look at regional appetite for investment. This is something that any founders are very familiar with. In California, if you've got a good background, if you've got a good market that you're going after, it's what's your market you're going after, what's your team, and what's your traction. Those are typically the three things that are looked at early stage. In California, that's what they consider, and if they want in the deal, they'll get in the deal. And then you get out to Texas, Nashville, and things like that. I heard this guy in Texas talk about how he needed a 60-page investment memo to make a seed investment. Well, I'll tell you how many AI companies that guy is going to invest in. That's zero, because that's not competitive. That's not market. You're going to just end up with a bunch of biotech and pharma things where people are taking moonshots on super wild science ideas, which is great. Sure, whatever, if that's what you're into. But you're going to miss out on other things just because you decided not to participate in the market.
And I just got so much value out of Mark from HubSpot, right? He's like, when I got in this game, there wasn't private equity, right? The internet was just taking off. Like the startups were not a thing. Now they are a thing. And there's lots of people jumping on board how to build a startup, how to scale a startup, how to raise money, or how to get acquired. Like Alex has his acquisition model. There's lots of different models. In your experience working with 212, in your experience, how do you guys value like pre-revenue startups?
It's hard. There's no real formula. And look, I'm not the investment decision maker. Just want to make that clear. We're not lead investors. And so we don't go in and say, here's what we value the company at. The founders come and say, hey, we're raising money at this valuation and this fund has already agreed to lead it. So that's usually what ends up happening. There's Kleiner Perkins, Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, somebody like that says, we're going to put in $4 million at a, I mean, that's probably that's more of a Series A type thing, but seed stage, somebody says, we're going to put in $1 million at a $15 million valuation cap. Do you guys want a piece? That's the conversation that happens. And then the founders say, this is what we're at. Do you want it? Do you not want it? Because if you negotiate with each person on an individual basis, a lot of times the investment agreements will have most favored nation rights. So whoever gets the best deal, that deal gets applied to everybody else that invests. And so the founders don't want to take that deal because then it lowers valuation for everybody else just because they want one person to get in. And people cut that corner by doing things like also issuing advisory shares. That's something that I've seen folks do too. But the bottom line is that the valuation, right, when you start, if that matters a lot, then you're in it for the wrong things, and you should go buy Microsoft and your TD Ameritrade account.
That was funny. Yeah, I love that. So what is going to be your methodology for scaling Coach CRM? Do you look at mergers? Are you looking for acquisition or just grow it out organically?
Just grow, baby, grow, and see where it goes.
Grow, baby, grow. I love that. I mean, I'm going to make that one of the key, posts. Say that again.
Grow, baby, grow.
Grow, baby, grow, and go, baby, go. I love it.
That's it. Yeah, because, man, if you're, again, okay, so I said that on the investment side, from a founder's perspective, if you're early stage and thinking about acquisition, what are you doing? It's like my old basketball coach used to say, if you try to not get hurt, you're going to get hurt. If you build this thing to sell it, maybe you'll sell it, but who are you going to sell it to? Are you thinking that far ahead of, I'm building this thing to sell to this person? Well, how many of that person are there? What if it doesn't work out? It's like you were talking about with Mark earlier. Just go where the customer pain points are, build the best product that you can build. Sales execution needs to be at a certain level. And that's one of the things that we can help folks with. And then don't give up, because life's hard. A lot of people giving up lately. I don't get it. Like, oh, you're out of money. So figure it out.
Especially to get and I've hired the wrong people, and it literally cost me $1 million just because they went down the wrong path. Have you ever experienced hiring the wrong people, and what was the effect?
I have, and I'm not scared to get rid of people early. That's the trick, is get them in. I think one of the dumbest pieces of advice I hear is hire slow and fire fast. Well, if you hire slow, what you're doing is you're saying, all right, there's this person out there who will eventually potentially work for me after a lot of steps in the process. And no one that they've ever worked with before wants to hire them. While we're waiting to go through our long process because we're hiring slow, nobody else wants to hire them. And then we're going to hire them. So we're missing out on all the people that have self-selected out of the employment workforce because their founding companies are retired or whatever. We're missing out on all the people that have got promoted past this level. We're missing out on all the people that are being captively held by folks that they used to work with. We're missing out on all the people that are hot commodities because everybody else wants to gobble them up as soon as they see them on the market. So the best we can hope for is a C- D+ player if we hire slow.
Yeah, and the best people already have a job.
Yeah. Best people aren't waiting around to apply to your company. If you got an inbound application to your company and then you're going to hire slow, you're going to make bad hires because you're dealing with, I just went through a bunch of different scenarios, like 5th, 6th, 7th level of.
Or somebody else is going to snap them up. They're going to see the talent. And they're going to be like, because when you get somebody who's excellent, they're going to get hired. And your hire slow methodology doesn't work, right? But I do believe in fire fast.
I do too. Yeah. So fire fast too. Hire fast, whatever it is. And firing is something that if you coach really well, a lot of times folks will quit before you have to fire them because they'll self-realize it's not a good fit.
Yep, especially if they're held accountable in front of their peers. So that's why I love daily huddles, impacts, meetings. I call it prime time, baby. Prime time. So during prime time, stand and deliver. And then once a week, everybody has a management accountability plan, and we go through that. And what's the percentage of increase? And if that map doesn't move, they'll eventually just resign because they understand they can blame the product all day long. They can blame the company. They can blame the management. But when your entire system has accountability, and at the end of that, what support is needed? So you need tools, you need manpower, you need whatever you need. If you cannot deliver, wait a minute, I gave you everything you needed. They'll opt out.
Yeah.
And I love that because they just resign rather than building a shitstorm, right? And blaming and creating a toxic environment. So I've learned the hard way. Bradley's a good friend of mine. He wrote the book, The Hard Way. Things I learned the hard way so that you don't have to. So there's some great golden nuggets in there. Let's talk about the future of sales. What's your take, Cory? Because, there's AI, and a lot of people are in, like, when you research Google, as an example, answer the public or whatever, will AI replace salespeople?
AI is going to replace a lot of salespeople. Because what is sales? Well, the whole point of, let's look at it very simply. You don't have salespeople at Walmart. And you don't have salespeople at Walmart for a very specific reason, is there's really no information asymmetry, which I'll define in a second. There's no information asymmetry between what you think you're getting and what you're getting. So information asymmetry exists when you think that something is one thing, but somebody on the other end of the conversation thinks that it might be something else. How do we solve for this? Well, for example, we go to Walmart. We don't ask for demos or anything like that. We look at the specs, we get it, whatever. Now we go buy a car. We have information asymmetry because we think, does it drive smooth? Does it have enough storage? Does my spouse like it? Will my kids like it? What's the noise that it makes when how fast is it? So you got all these things, and we need to see that with our own eyes. We need to experience a little bit more. Well, in B2B sales, it's the same thing. We've got asymmetry between what the sales team believes the product can do for the prospect and what the prospect knows about the product. They don't fully understand what it does. They don't understand the use cases, customer stories. They've got a bunch of resistance built up that they need to explore and get answers. They don't understand how it fares against competitors and things like that. Well, none of those things require human intervention. They just require some kind of specific response. And I think that there'll still be salespeople because there'll be a competitive advantage, because if one company has a human that you can talk to and one company doesn't, we've seen how that works post-sale, customer service, customer success. That gives you an edge. So having salespeople will still be an edge. But what happens is there'll be fewer people required, be fewer managers required, because managers will be able to do more. You won't have these stupid structures where you've got a manager overseeing 4 people, which is just not a job.
Oh, it is a job. It's a cushy job. Yeah,
Exactly.
Job. Those guys, you know what I call them?
Golfers?
Milkmen. Because they're just milking the company.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll get it where you might have a manager who can effectively manage 12 people instead of 8. And then you've got salespeople that can work more accounts, they can close more business. And so you just don't need as many of them, because technology gives labor leverage. And if you look at any technological innovation in the past, from the Industrial Revolution through the things that we saw with manufacturing and distribution from World War II through the 80s, up into what the internet was able to do, we're able to do more with the same or fewer people. And there's nothing different this time, other than the white collar worker is much more impacted than they had been previously, because previous revolutions have only impacted blue collar workers for the most part.
Amen. I love it. Cory, brilliant. All right, so this has been, enlightening. I'd love to connect again, dude, and I show you what I got, you show me what you got. Obviously, there's definitely some synergy happening there, whether you look at mine and I look at yours and see how they can work together. I love what I'm hearing from you, dude. It's straight up golden nuggets especially for the listeners out there. What's next for Cory?
Just building, build, baby, build, sell, baby, sell.
Sell, baby, sell. Go, baby, go. I love it, man.
That's it.
So obviously, we'll send this out to you. Where can, and we'll edit Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to send a review about what you liked on this podcast or share it with somebody who would need it to definitely improve their business, building and scaling sales teams, do me a favor, share. It means a lot to me so that we can help others grow and live in abundance. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for joining me today. And if you got value from this episode, do me a favor, subscribe, and refer a friend. And if you want even more value, go to thesalesmachine.com, click on resources, and there's tons of resources there to increase profits and drive performance in your business. Right on, come on.